Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly for pricing. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Today, we're discussing part of a family of more accessibly priced Ulysse Nardin Freaks that came out in 2018 from the Freak Out series. This is the Freak Out Full Black. Now, quick note, unlike the later Freak X with its automatic winding and its crown, this is a traditional Freak with the dual direct impulse escapement, the full fat 7-day manual wind power reserve, and bezel setting. What made this a more accessible collection was that the previous near universal use of precious metal on the Freak was dispensed with. So here you get the same horological value in the movement, but you don't pay for gold or platinum. Now, this watch in DLC titanium and sapphire is wonderfully light. It is the most deceptive 45mm diameter I've ever encountered because just eye in hand as the judge, I thought 42-43, even though I knew 45 was the spec sheet. It's also remarkably thin. No one's going to mistake this for an ultra-thin watch, but at 13.2 millimeters for a carousel with a 7-day power reserve, that is darn impressive, and it is cuff compatible. It's fairly broad, though, across the wrist. This is its biggest dimension, 54.2 millimeters, and then it's got a 23mm spacing between the lugs. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters circumference, it's big, but big is the look. No Freak is designed to be a bashful piece. And while I think you do need a wrist of at least 16 centimeters circumference to wear this, I have a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and I can tell you that it's an effortless fit and feel. It is lower than you would expect, so it'll fit underneath the cuff, but no one buys any watch called the Freak Full Black in order to make it disappear. And in fact, it is the Freak Out Full Black. Inside out, lots to love. You can see that there's textile on the strap. There's a contrasting red binding stitch, a little bit of bolstering. It conforms to the case band, so it's a highly integrated look. On the bottom, you can see it's calf skin, and it is a brand new UN factory strap. We'll roll around. We have a combination of DLC and titanium for the buckle. The buckle is a double deployant, and it has a twin trigger release, so it can't pop open accidentally. So you get an element of protection against accidental deployment. And although no Freak is a highly water-resistant watch, this one, with 30 meters water resistant, is actually one of the better examples. The watch features the traditional Freak combination of a setting bezel and a winding case back, and because it is a Ulysse Nardin, we have individual number plating on the side with a combination of satination on the plaque and polish on the bolts, a nod to Ulysse Nardin's heritage as a maker of esteemed marine chronometers or navigation clocks, whose serial numbers were almost universally blazoned on plaques laid out broadside. The case itself is media blasted, so it's muted and finished, but it does have strong lug profiles that are broken out from the case band, and you can see that the bezel itself is highly technical. What appears to be a simple geometric decoration is actually there to help you gain a better purchase on the bezel when you set the watch. Now, as with all Freaks since the second model, the original Freak had a free-floating bezel that tended to set itself. We have this little braking system. When you push it down, it locks the bezel, but when you pull it up, it unlocks the bezel. And it's a very simple watch to read. Right now, it's 2 o'clock. You can see the lower index points to the 2, the upper index, the baguette movement, that is your minute hand. So right there, that's 150, that's 145, and that's 130, just like that. Yes, there's lume, though it's not exceptionally bright. I'll give you a look. It's enough that you could tell, relatively speaking, what time it is. The rest of the dial, however, will remain a bit of a mystery. There is a lot to see on the rest of the dial. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that there's a secondary sapphire that features floating numerals, which is quite beautiful and ethereal. We have a name plaque finished by hand that features the Ulysse Nardin maker's mark. And again, we'll move this a little bit so you can get a better view of the dial. We have a baguette movement. This has been true since the first Freak. While often described as a tourbillon, the fact is not every Freak has a tourbillon. In fact, the Diavolo series, which I believe came out in 2011, was the first of the Freak tourbillons in series production. A carousel is a little bit different. It accomplishes the same thing in that it rotates the escapement, the hairspring, and the balance through several different orientations, but what it does not do is power the escapement and the carriage with a single drivetrain. So if I had a tourbillon that were somehow linked up to a setting mechanism and I tried to turn it and move it, I would crash the escapement trying to do that. Here, the drivetrain that runs the escapement and the drivetrain that moves the carriage, those are two independent operations. And Bonnebaniksen created the carousel in the late 19th century. I want to say 1893. He was a Danish watchmaker. He wanted something that was more durable, but just as effective at canceling the effect of gravity as a tourbillon. So he designed the carousel, and that's what you have on a Freak. So we have a lot going on here in terms of technology. We have the baguette movement, but what's more exceptional is just how much of this UN builds itself. You have the anchor, which is the symbol of the company. Actually, see the anchor. It's the shape of the index for the minutes, for the hours, the balance bridge, as well as the terminal end of the drivetrain. And you can see two silicon escape wheels. This is the dual Ulysse escapement. It is a system that is unlubricated, full silicon, anti-magnetic, and because it doesn't have lubrication, it doesn't age the way a standard escapement ages and becomes less efficient as the lubrications dry up and become gum. So we have this low friction system that is a double direct impulse, a little bit like Breguet's natural escapement. There's no conventional Swiss lever in there. The wheels impulse the balance directly. Each wheel impulses in one direction and only in one direction. So the balance, when it's impulsed, is impulsed tangentially and then only in its direction of travel. All of the reversing is done by the hairspring, not by the wheels themselves, which makes this a very efficient system and helps to explain how it achieves 7 days of power reserve. Now, it beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour, as most Freaks have since the very early models. The earliest ones were, I believe, 21.6, but it stepped up later to a modern high beat rate, 4 hertz. Now, it's also free sprung with a full balance bridge, which gives it surprising shock resistance. And because both the escapement and the hairspring are made of UN's own proprietary silicon technology, all of this is highly anti-magnetic. Flip it over, and you can see how you wind the watch. You wind it using a case back. I'll do my best to keep the buckle out of the way, but you wind using the case back, and it does eventually energize a 7-day power reserve. So you really only need to do this once a week. You have sort of informal power reserve indicator, which is the coiling of the mainspring. Carol Forestier-Casapi originally created this idea of an enormous, all-encompassing mainspring driving a watch, and while that wasn't precisely how the Freak worked out, we wound up with a baguette carousel on top of that full-width mainspring. Her patents and ideas were largely honored in the creation of the Freak, which is why, along with Pierre Gigax and Ludwig Oxlin, as well as the Godfather, Rolf Schneider, she is always considered to be one of the creators of the Freak. Lots going on here. We have a wave motif. We have a disc of silicon reminding you that UN, uniquely among smaller manufacturers, does produce its own silicon technology. We have satination of metal, we have blued screws, and if you look closely, you can see that the finishing of the baguette movement is quite artisanal and handsome. It's not entirely manual, but it's largely manual and beautifully detailed. It is a very, very, very special watch. A Freak out, and this is a Freak out, is very much a Freak. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details, and you'll find out why I'm probably almost certainly going to assemble a UN collection someday. Drawn to the lodestone rock, I just love their oddities and innovation. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing.